welcome to the No Horsing Around podcast, training camp kickoff. And today, guys, we only got them for audio, a little bit of technical difficulties, but we were nice enough to have George Bremer stop by. He's on the Herald Bulletin, Colts beat writer. He's down there, kind of knows the ins and outs of everything. So I thought, hey, man, what better to do to start this season off, our training camp version, than to have George on the show. George, how you been, man?
Good, good. Hopefully I can figure out and get this computer fixed. It's definitely outsmarting me right now.
I told you. Well, it doesn't take much for that to happen for me as well, George. So No Horsing Around podcast, we just dive right in. We go straight for it and just kind of those burning questions that everyone has when it comes to training camp. And I'm sure there's so many different narratives, and that's the thing I like about training camp. It's just so fluid. It just changes every minute, every hour, and it really gets football kind of calibrated in the right direction. So we start off by one crazy topic. I'm working, George. I look down at Twitter and I'm reading something and I'm thinking, is this seriously the truth? And somebody's name is now evidently Shaquille Leonard and no longer Darius Leonard, in form of how he wants to be, known as a football player moving forward.
Yeah, I tell you, there were a couple times today I was sending out tweets and I thought, no one's going to believe this. It was almost like, why would you make something like this up? But there were just some silly things going on there. With Darius, he wants to be Shaquille moving forward. It's his middle name. He said that, he's always kind of family and friends. He's always gone by Shaquille. For whatever reason, when he was drafted, he never really corrected anybody. He said he didn't want to really raise any stink, didn't want to be that guy. And so he never really said anything and ends up in a situation where 4 years later, he does speak up. And he said, he was the first one to say, look, I know it's going to be hard. People have called me Darius for 4 years. He's not going to get angry if that's what happens. But he wants to be Shaquille moving forward. And I say, I'm going to do my best to honor that. But I guarantee you, I'm going to mess up more than a few times. I still call the Raiders Oakland. So, it takes me a while to catch on to these things.
Absolutely, man. I think I'm going to, in my head, I was talking to co-host Stephen Burton earlier, kind of off the air. And I said, I think I'm just going to go with Shaq to start with. Baby steps. We'll start with that. He seems like he's pretty open to that, but he's pretty lighthearted about the situation. And I think it's kind of cool. That's a name he grew up on, and his family and his friends called him that. And he allows the fan base and now everybody kind of in on that part of his life. Pretty cool. Question number 2. George, who in the hell is our number 2 wide receiver right now? Alec Pierce, I know big shoes to fill, but you can't really expect a rookie day one to come in and be your, obvious clear cut number 2. Who is the number 2?
Yeah, there isn't one, and I think it's going to be by committee. And you hear running back by committee all the time. This is going to be wide receiver by committee. Obviously there's a lot of expectations on Alec Pierce's shoulders, but like you said, you got a kid like that, you can't just come in and, maybe if he was top 5 pick, you could do that. But, he went 53rd for a reason. He's good. There's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of upside. But, he's raw. He's got some things he's going to have to learn. He's going to have to develop some of his route running. He's going to have to prove he can get off the press coverage. That's tough for all rookies, probably except for Jamar Chase. I think all human rookies, it's a tough thing for them to do. And, I think it's probably expecting too much of him to come in week 1 down in Houston and be that guy. Maybe by the end of the year, he develops into that role. But I think you're going to have to look at, a little bit from him, a little bit from Paris Campbell, if he can stay healthy, a little bit from Ashton Doolin, who I think is going to take a step up. And I keep my eye on Desmond Patman. He had a good spring, and that means nothing. We know that. A lot of guys have had good springs and not been able to carry that over when the season starts. But he's got good size. He's got good athleticism. They kind of took a flyer on him late in the draft, but I think he's a guy that they saw the potential in. Is he going to be the number 2 guy? No, but I think it's going to be all of those guys together. You get a little bit from Pierce, you get a little bit from Campbell, you get a little bit from Doolin, you get a little bit from Patman. And then, Chris Ballard said today, they expect the tight ends to play into that with Jelani Woods and Drew Ogletree, the 2 rookies coming in there. Obviously, Mo Alley Cox is going to be a big part of that. They think Naheem Hines has a chance to step up and be a bigger part of the passing game. So, I really think it's going to be one of those, and that's what, in all honesty, that's what Frank Reich likes to do anyway. But I don't think there is going to be any kind of Michael Pittman's the clear cut number one. And then after that, it's probably going to be matchups in the hot hand every week.
Hey George, is T.Y. Hilton? I hate to just beat a dead horse here. Is he kind of the break in case of emergency type of deal for us? Like if things go bad, health is a factor heading into the season, or we go out and we do a true evaluation. We're 1 or 2 weeks in, and we think, oh no, man, we these guys are just not ready to go out there and play. Is he kind of that guy that Chris Ballard has in his back pocket, thinking, you know what, I'll give him a call then. Otherwise, we're really going to give these young guys every chance to prove themselves and to earn the ability to play football in the NFL.
I think that's a big part of it. You've got a guy that could come in here literally after the third preseason game and be ready to go, especially at Houston. I don't think it would take much at all to get T.Y. Hilton up and ready for that game. So there's no rush. I'm sure on his part, it's the same way too. He's got, a young kid who's becoming a football star on his own in the youth leagues. I'm sure given the choice, T.Y. would rather be home longer and watch more of his games and his camp. And I do think a big part of this is giving these young kids every opportunity, not just in training camp, which those are good reps, but out there in these preseason games. And when you've got Nick Foles as the backup quarterback, they're going to get more looks. When Matt Ryan leaves the game, it's not going to be, there's going to be a drop off, obviously, but it's not going to be a drop off to a guy who's not an NFL caliber quarterback. And I think that's going to be big for this receiving corps. They're going to have a chance in the second quarter, maybe the third in one of these games where they still got Foles out there and maybe they can still make plays and catch somebody's eye. And I also think a little bit of it's on T.Y.'s part. I mean, it's going to be tough for him to decide, do you want to come back, take less money? I would almost be certain, especially at this point, he's not going to get a big deal. Have a role that's not really well defined. It's not easy to do, as long as he's been in the league and as much as he's done for this franchise, he's earned the right to do whatever he wants. And I think a little bit of it is on his end too. That's to me, that's just common sense on his part. Do you want to go back and do this? And we'll see. I think all parties probably, as this preseason starts to wrap up, maybe earlier if there's injuries, but as this preseason starts to wrap up, probably all parties will get together and look, the Colts will have to decide, do they feel like T.Y. can help? Is it worth the move? And T.Y. is going to have to decide what they're offering. Is it worth it to him? It's not an easy situation, but it's obvious there's interest on both sides or they wouldn't still be talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I found that pretty clear and pretty, it's pretty glaring that Chris has been pretty transparent this whole off season, and he's never really wavered off of that stance that he and T.Y. have been in communication, all off season. Nothing has materialized, but that being said, he's not shut the door on it. So it leaves me to think there's a little bit of a crack there. But Chris Ballard, to his credit, I think has been very honest. He's always been honest with his coaching staff, his players, and for that, right, even the fan base. I think T.Y. knows exactly what's going on in Chris Ballard's mind, and he has the right to go out there and test the market. And he's not decided to do that. He's waited to maybe have an opportunity to come back home. And if not, we'll see what goes on with T.Y. Hilton. But it'll definitely be interesting. I've got my antenna up a little bit with Michael Strawn being on that PUP list. Speaking of that PUP list, one name not on there, Julian Blackmon. That's super encouraging. And wow, I mean, this guy seems to heal at a very, very fast rate, GB.
He's shown it, his rookie year coming out a lot faster than anybody thought, coming out and having a really great season. When he was on the field for minicamp in June, we kind of raised our eyebrows. He said then he felt good. He felt like he was on target. Doesn't sound like he's going to have any restrictions. We'll see. It wouldn't surprise me if he's limited a little bit early in camp, if he doesn't take 100% of the snaps he normally would. I don't think that'll be a big deal. And maybe he will. I mean, it's Julian Blackmon. I'm not going to put anything past him. But I think that's not something that's been ruled out. But the fact that he's out there and he's not on PUP and he's going to be, at least right now, for all intents and purposes, ready to go week one, pretty incredible thing. I think he's a guy that they need a lot from this year. When you look at that safety position and Kari Willis retiring, it doesn't sound like the Rodney McLeod thing's very serious. Sounds like he'll be back really quickly. In fact, I think Chris Ballard said it's more the team right now than him. Why he's on pup? They're just being, abundance of caution. But I think that, it's probably not bad for these first couple of days that he's not on the field either, and Nick Cross gets some extra snaps. I mean, whether I would assume he's going to be with the ones. We'll find that out Wednesday. But I think that's going to be good for another young kid that they need a lot. When you look at that, you got McLeod, who's whatever, that knee injury is, he's not there right now. You got Cross, who's a rookie. You've got Armani Watts, who's never been a starter in this league. There's a lot on Julian Blackmon's shoulders. So for him to be ready to go right away, I think is huge. And he feels like one of those guys, if he can stay healthy, he could be a breakout guy this year. We'll see, but you see what the safeties have done in Gus Bradley's system over the years. Blackmon has a lot of those qualities. You feel like he's a guy who could really thrive in this scheme.
Absolutely, man. So as we focus in on, and I think it's always really exciting, especially for the new people. When you talk about free agents, you want to talk about rookies coming in. Is there any one or two guys that, just in particular, you're going to be looking at a little bit harder than you normally would just because they're a fresh face and you're like, man, I want to be down on the field and I want to see this guy live in action and see how he plays, with live bullets and reps. Is there a guy or two that you're just excited about covering this year?
Yeah, I think one right off the bat's unique in Ngakoue. The position is just so important on this team. And, we talk about how important it is in Gus Bradley's defense, but I can't think of any defense where that primary pass rusher isn't the most important guy or, number two on the list. It's just such a huge thing to have. His consistency throughout his career, you just kind of want to see where he's at. But I think he's been a really fun guy so far, too, engaging with fans on social media, asking which high school football games to go on Friday night, which section his mom should sit in. He's just a guy who seems to have really embraced this franchise, this city with open arms. I think he wants a home. He's tired of bouncing around. He's been around the league quite a bit. I know he asked out of Jacksonville. I'm not really sure what happened in Baltimore. The Raiders situation obviously was just, Chandler Jones became available and all of a sudden he's expendable. So I think when he signed in Vegas, he thought he was there. That was his long-term, stop. And it didn't work out. Now he's back with Gus Bradley. I know he's on a 1-year deal, but it just seems like he's a guy who really wants to be here. And if you look at his history and what he's been able to do, he should be a really productive guy. I think he's going to help Kwity Paye a lot. It's just be fun to watch how he goes about his business here in training camp. And I think the other interesting thing about that is he's on the right side. So he's going to be going against Matt Pryor and Bernard Raymond. And Raymond's another guy that, I really want to see, because Chris Ballard said today, we asked him what single position battle is he looking forward to the most. He said left tackle. And he wants to see how that shakes out. They really like what they saw from Pryor, but can he do it on the left side? On a snap in, snap out basis? Can Raymond step up as a 3rd-round pick, be a starter in year one as a rookie at such a huge position? That battle in of itself is so intriguing. And then to see those two guys going head to head with Ngakoue, I think that's going to be, to me, that's going to be the most exciting part of training camp.
Yeah, I mean, to see the way that, like you mentioned earlier, he's embraced this city, interacting and engaging with fans. Surely seems like he's, he wants to be here for the long term. He's saying all the right things, doing all the right things. So, I mean, definitely has the fan base on his back right now. Another guy kind of transitioning into the rookie part, Jelani Woods, man. I mean, he's a very intriguing guy. And I know that Chris Ballard and Frank Reich just raved about this guy. But when you think about how big of a target he is, I mean, you got Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods in the red zone. I don't know if I want to be on the 1-yard line with one of those guys coming full speed ahead at me, in between that pylon, man. I mean, Jelani Woods, do you expect him to have a substantial impact, or do you think it's going to be rookie growing pains as usual at that position?
It's going to be interesting, because I think it's a lot like Pearson that you have to be careful with how much you want to put on his shoulders. But you're dealing with a guy who's a giant, obviously. And I think they feel like there's a lot of untapped potential. He's really only been a receiving tight end for 1 year. His whole time at Oklahoma State, he was an inline guy. Now all of a sudden, Virginia kind of gives him a chance to get out there and do his thing. And I don't want to, you know, take anything away from the Virginia quarterback. But you look at the tape, the balls weren't perfectly placed. It wasn't like he was getting hit in stride. He had to stop a lot. He had to make a lot of plays. And a guy like Matt Ryan and his accuracy, his willingness to use the middle of the field and go to those tight ends, you feel like he's in as good a situation as he can be. Frank Reich's offense in general, how tight end friendly it is, there's a feeling that Woods is in as good a situation as he can be as a rookie tight end. Now, what that translates to, we'll have to see, but I think there's a lot going in his favor. And again, the fact that the receivers depth chart is not that imposing. There aren't a lot of guys over there screaming for the ball. I think Woods is another guy that it would be really nice for this team if he steps up and has a real solid rookie year. What that looks like remains to be seen, but I also wouldn't count out Drew Ogletree. I think he looked really good in the spring as well. He's a former receiver. I know he was a later pick, and he comes from a smaller school at Youngstown State, but they've liked this kid for a while. They were on him all the way back to his time at Findlay. And I think that duo together, I think they can do some really good things this year, along with Mo Alley Cox. They can put up a really huge goal line offense if they want to, from receivers all the way across the tight ends. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that all works out in the red zone.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And to your point, you think of a guy they drafted, last year in Granson, and man, I mean, he's not guaranteed a shoe-in spot or a shoe-in, a lot of playing time. He's going to have to come out here and earn it right away, man. I mean, it's going to be a battle at the top there. It seems like Mo Alley Cox, they locked him up, but those other three guys, very talented. And, I love that competition in that room. And if Granson can prove that he can run the routes the proper way, if he can hold on to the football and not make those mental errors, you got to throw him in there as well, I would think. George, this team right here, as far as the interior offensive line, is there any concern for you? Danny Pender is never started at guard. They love Danny Pender. And I think he was fantastic as a fill-in for Ryan Kelly last year. Seems to be just a very good football player and a high IQ player. Any concerns for you as far as his durability? He's been a little bit nicked up as he's been a Colt, just a little bitty injuries here and there. Any concerns at that interior guard position?
Yeah, I think talent's there, like you said. I think he's got that athleticism that they love. He can get out in front, pull, do a lot of things they like their guards to do. I think his ability had a lot to do with them feeling comfortable letting Mark Glowinski go and letting Chris Reed go. But until you see a guy go out and play 17 games, you're going to be worried about the durability, because he hasn't proven it yet, obviously. And so you want to go and see where that is. And more than him, it's just the overall depth that concerns me. If Ryan Kelly goes down, Penner's going to have to probably slide in at center. And now you've got another guy over there at right guard, which, is that Will Fries? Is it maybe whoever loses that battle between Raymond and Pryor? Does a guy like Jason Spriggs end up working into that? Does Dennis Kelly work into that mix? I'm not sure where that is, but there's not a lot of answers. If you look at the roster right now, the depth of those three interior spots, it isn't real encouraging. Now, you could have said the same thing last year this time, and then Chris Reed really came on and proved himself during camp. And obviously was able to earn kind of a co-starting job at times with Mark Lewinsky. So maybe somebody steps up like that. But I really look at that interior offensive line depth, and I think if either Nelson, Kelly, or Penner goes down, I don't know how comfortable you are with the next man up.
Yeah, I would totally agree. That would be a play. We're going to highlight some things as we go through training camp. And I think Stephen and I, that's going to be a position that we're really going to keep a pulse on for sure. Now, I'll say this, Chris Ballard, call it gift from God's, just being a very good general manager and evaluator. He did a very good job of having some depth guys last year with Chris Reed, and prior. I mean, he's going to get to compete. They're going to pay him $5.5 million to compete on that left tackle position. And we'll just see. Maybe he's a guy that can slide in if there's an injury. I know Chris Ballard is big on the best five. That's what he keeps preaching. Let's put the best five out there. So that'll be definitely interesting. George, we've made it over 20 minutes on this podcast, and we've not mentioned Matt Ryan, and that's over. So we're going to talk about Matt Ryan, just what he has, the feel from you, the conversations that you've had. He says all the right things. He seems to be doing all the right things with the players on and off the field, behind the scenes. How has it been covering him up until this point? And let's say in comparisons to years past where maybe it was a little bit different covering a Carson Wentz, who was a little bit more reserved. How's it been covering Matt Ryan up until this point?
Yeah, it feels a lot like it did with Philip Rivers at this point. A guy who's been around, he's kind of seen it all. They're obviously different people, both from a personality standpoint and from a quarterbacking standpoint. Rivers, he just always felt like so down to earth. I don't know how else to put it. I'll never forget. It stinks that we never really got to be around him live and in person. It was always Zoom, that whole season. But they play a 1:00 game, or they play the 4:00 game, and we'd be talking to him afterwards. He would know what happened in the 1:00 games. Like, he was paying attention. He was a football fan first and foremost. And I think it was really fun to see. Matt Ryan's not quite like that. I don't know that he's going to know all the 1:00 game scores once his game ends, but he's a little bit like Andrew Luck, a little bit like Peyton Manning, in that the way he commands the team, the way he sort of, people just kind of snap to attention when he's around. I think more than what he said, it's what his teammates have said about him. And in particular, Jonathan Taylor today, who said, you want to go out and play great for him because he's holding himself to this high standard and he's holding everybody else to that high standard. And it's not a pressure. He's inspiring them. They want to play hard for this guy. I'm not saying they didn't do that last year with Carson, but to be able to do that in 2 or 3 months, however long he was with them this spring, and in those little receiver, camps that he ran over the offseason, it's pretty impressive to see how much his teammates have already bought in. Now, this team has had a different quarterback every year for 5 years, so they're probably a little more used to it than most. But I've yet to see, and obviously they're not going to come out and say bad things, but I've yet to see one guy come out to talk to the media since we started in April talking to these guys who wasn't just glowing about Matt Ryan. And you don't have to pull it out of them. I mean, they're all, whether it's his accuracy, whether it's his command in the huddle, whether it's his, quizzing them in the hallways. Although Zaire Franklin said today they did kind of create a cheat sheet for him, just since he is the 5th quarterback in 5 years. Like, here's some things the other guys did. Here's some do's and don'ts. It'll be interesting to see how Matt Ryan responds to that. But he's managed. It feels like somehow, much like Rivers did, he's managed to be just one of the guys, but at the same time command the respect of every guy in that locker room.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And you just mentioned in just a short amount of time at how he's kind of already gained and earned that respect, from his teammates. And I know they've been glowing in the off season, and that's always happy season, right? Like, we're always talking about, we're just so excited about, turning the chapter, getting that bad taste of our mouth from last season, but it feels real. I mean, it feels real, George. And it feels like that the Indianapolis Colts, I know in the past that they've had really, really high hopes and high expectations of their football teams. And this year, it feels a little bit more like a blue-collar mentality, a little bit more like, we're going to just not talk about it. We're just going to go out there and compete, put the best product that we can put on the field, and at the very end of the day, hope we're in the playoffs with a chance, with a leader like Matt Ryan leading us. And we probably have a chance to win any of those games if we do all of the right things, and then health kind of sticks on our side. So that being said, would you have expectations of the Indianapolis Colts being a playoff football team this year?
I think so. You look around the division and what happened, and I still can't get over Tennessee losing AJ Brown. I just feel like that's a huge, huge loss for that team. He's obviously not the only piece there. They have a lot going for them. Mike Vrabel's done an absolutely excellent job with that football team year in and year out. I think they're definitely going to be in the mix, and they've got to be the division favorite until the Colts knock them off, or the Texans or the Jaguars or whoever. When you've won 2 in a row, it's your division. You control it. But I think if you look at it on paper, you have to feel like if not this year, when for the Colts, a lot of things are in place. There's some question marks. We've talked about a couple of them already here today, but this feels like a pretty balanced football team. They've got a guy under center who they have the utmost faith and belief in. I think there's a lot of excitement around this new defense and what they could bring. Not so much that there's a new coordinator, that's part of it, but bringing in Unique Ngakoue, bringing in Stephon Gilmore, having whenever he gets out there a healthy Shaquille Leonard, it's going to be a big, different looking defense. I think there's a lot of excitement about that, what that could mean for the offense. If this team should, on paper, win the AFC South, I feel like that should be their goal. But
I agree.
I think I like best about it, though, is that every time we bring up expectations, they'll admit that they're high, and they'll admit that they feel like they should do a lot of things. But every single one of them, to a man, has said, look at last year and look at how it finished. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. We're not worrying about what it looks like on paper. We got to go out and prove it. And I think that's, you kind of mentioned that, in the question. I think that's a big difference with this team. In years past, those expectations have been just as high. They've talked about the Super Bowl. They've done all those things again this year. But there is that, whatever you want to call it, blue collar mentality. There's a scar still left by the way last season ended, and they're respecting that. And I think that's important going into all this because, you want to do these things and you have the potential to do these things, but they know none of it matters. You can go on if you don't go out on the field next to you. They know it better than anybody in the league right now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just a great way of putting it. In some ways, George, they got to live with that scar from last year. And, the only way that kind of heals and goes away is coming out and proving that that they are learning from their mistakes and they're starting to overcome those mental letdowns. And I think there's some things that could change, as far as, with the coaching staff. I think they had a few little hiccups as the season goes. I'm a big Frank Reich supporter. I always have been. I think he has a great mind. And, football's hard, but it's also pretty simple, George. If you have a good quarterback and you have a good football team around them, usually good things are going to happen. If you can't figure out that quarterback position, you're going to struggle and you're going to be, border on mediocrity or worse. And for the fans last year, it always hurts when the season ends, but I think last year, it hurt in a different way. And I just ready to get that bad taste out of their mouth, go out there and prove it and be super humble. And it's exciting. So last question for you. You mentioned earlier about, Stephon Gilmore a little bit. Obviously, he's the clear number one. On the other side, you got Kenny Moore, you got Stephon Gilmore. You're going to lock those guys in. And then you got Rodgers, you got Faison. Kind of in a little bit of a training camp battle for that last cornerback position. That's maybe that starting spot. I'd say, and I'd be interested in your opinion, I'd say that Rodgers has a little bit of the leg up just from the familiarity and the ability to take the football away. But what are your thoughts on that? And are you going to be monitoring that during the training camp sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right there with left tackle. Obviously, the left tackle spot's more important because just that position is so key to this team, to every team. And the third cornerback is also important, but not nearly as important as your left tackle. Uh, but I think it's going to be a really good battle. I think it's going to be really tight. They both look good in the spring, and again, good for them. They've got a long way to go. This competition really hasn't even begun yet. I think Faison's got he's got a leg up in one sense in that he's been with this defensive staff, except for Nate Ollie, the defensive line coach. It really doesn't affect him. Everybody else on this staff, he's been with them his whole career. He was with them with the Chargers. He was with them last year with the Raiders. So he knows this scheme probably as well as anybody on the defense, probably the best. I mean, Ngakwe's played in it for a couple of years, and he knows it well too, but it's literally the only thing Faison's known in the NFL. So I think and he's a guy with a really good attitude. Really excited to be here. Really excited to compete, and I think that helps him as well. But then you look at Isaiah Rodgers, and I think Gus Bradley mentioned it. He hasn't played in the system, so you haven't seen it the way you have with Faison. But his speed and his ball hawk ability, and the fact that even though he's a littler guy, he's willing to get in there and be physical, stick his nose in there and make plays. All of that makes you think this is a scheme that would highlight those things. So you would think he would be very good at it. Even though he hasn't played in it, you would think he would be very good in it. And whereas Faison knows the scheme better, Rodgers knows the personnel better. He's played with these guys. He's been in everybody but Gilmore he's been on the field with at one point or another. That's got to count for something too. And that's one of the things that Ballard was talking about the left tackle spot today. But one of the things that he mentioned is it's about how they work together as a team. And that's very true on the offensive line. It's true in the defensive secondary too. It's not just going to be which of these two guys, has the best stats during the preseason or which of these two guys individually looks the best. Who looks the best in concert with Julian Blackman and Nick Cross and, Gilmore and Moore and that whole group and McLeod, because that's what it's going to come down to. And you figure in that regard, Rodgers has the head start because he's been out there and they know him and he knows them. But I think it's a really close to 50-50 battle. And I think it's going to be really fun to watch because both these guys have played well so far. If they continue to play well, it'll be a really good decision for the coaching staff to have to make.
Absolutely, man. And I love Rodgers because he's just so different. He's really not, I always say he's really not Chris Ballard-ish. When you take into account of his size, Ballard generally likes longer people, bigger, more physical players. But I just always have rooted for him because I just think he's just got something, Chris Ballard, to kind of steal it from him. I don't know what it is, but he has it, and I think he kind of has that quality as well. So George, tell us what you're going to be doing here, man, and where everybody can find you here as training camp gets kicked off and what you got going on coming up.
Yeah, all my stuff is available at haroldbolton.com. You can follow me on Twitter at GM Bremer. I'll obviously be posted there as well. Tomorrow's a big day. We're going to talk to Matt Ryan after his first practice with the team. I'm sure that's going to be interesting. See how all that plays out, how he does and what his thoughts are. They obviously won't be in pads. And it's not going to be, a huge practice tomorrow, but it's going to be, that first one's always a big deal. And I think, we talked about it a couple times already today, but getting that taste out of their mouth from last year, it really does start with this first training camp practice. Eventually the goal is to go and beat Houston and be 1-0 for the first time since 2013. But you end the year the way they did, you spend the entire offseason living with it. And we've seen that from the players. I mean, obviously the new guys aren't carrying that baggage because they weren't here. But everybody who was on that field in Jacksonville, I think DeForest Buckner talked about it a little bit today. Is the idea that you have to, it lingers and there's nothing you can do about it, but you also have to move on. And I think that's throughout training camp, that's going to be the storyline. What indicators are there that this team can put that behind them and move forward? Because it's not the same thing as a real life tragedy. I don't want to compare it to actual tragedies, but it is one of the worst things that can happen to a football team, in a football game. To lose the way they did to the team that they did with what was on the line, it's a lot to come back from. And I think that's going to be the story of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with that anymore. I mean, like I said earlier, they all hurt when your season ends and you don't end it the way you wanted to. But I've been a fan, George. I'm 40 years old, and probably 33 of it I've been a Colts fan, and I don't know that one's hurt quite that bad, honestly. I mean, that is all timer. As far as you just didn't think it was going to happen, and it was just so many things during the course of those last 2 weeks that if just one of those things would have went right, T.Y. Hilton down the sideline, Carson Wentz misses them, Darius Leonard gets that interception. There's just so many things, but good news for us, new leaf, new quarterback, new season, kicking off training camp. Guys, if you haven't already, like, rate, review, share, subscribe, join the No Horsing Around family. I'm going to personally be out there Saturday. I'll try to get you some cool clips, cool footage, maybe even ask a few questions. I was lucky enough to get a media credential, so, they let a jackass in there to do that. But, hey, good for us and good for the No Horsing Around family. And, George, thank you so much for stopping in. And, as always, we'll catch up as the season goes.
Yeah, no problem. Can't wait to see you out there on Saturday night.
Absolutely.